Tonight, horror in the skies. A plane plummets 6,000 feet in minutes, leaving one man dead. 7 passengers are being treated with critical injuries after the Singapore Airlines flight suddenly hit severe turbulence. Passengers say they were told to put on their seatbelts with very little notice.
One huge loud noise, things were coming through the ceiling, water everywhere, people crying.
So what caused the turbulence and why is it getting worse? We'll find out tonight. Plus, we'll take a closer look at that International Criminal Court decision that has shocked Israel and Hamas. Hamas says the move to seek arrest warrants equated the victim with the executioner. Benjamin Netanyahu describes it as outrageous.
There has never been famine in Gaza. That is a false story. It is a lie.
That's a member of Israel's war cabinet denying his government's policies cause famine in Gaza. So should the actions of any army ever be above the law? We'll debate that tonight. Plus, public mourning and celebrations on social media as the funeral processions for Iran's president begin. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We begin tonight with the 5 minutes of chaos in the skies that left a British man dead and 7 others critically injured. Experts believe the Singapore Airlines flight fell into an air pocket and encountered severe turbulence over Thailand, prompting pilots to request an emergency landing. A 73-year-old man died after suffering from a heart attack, and passengers described people being launched into the plane's ceiling after it fell to the ground. In a moment, we'll discuss whether severe turbulence is becoming more common. But we begin tonight with a report from our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch.
Panels ripped from the ceiling, debris scattered across the floor, and a cabin battered by a dramatic ordeal for all on board. This is the aftermath of flight SQ321, where everyone, including the crew, wrestled to respond to sudden and extreme turbulence in a region with heavy tropical thunderstorms. Flight data shows the aircraft then dropped 6,000 feet in around 3 minutes. Thai authorities say a 73-year-old British man died of a suspected heart attack.
Maybe he's have a heart attack on plane or not, but after the doctor have to investigate his body again. And he's come with his wife. So his wife is go to the hospital at the time.
7 people remain in a critical condition. Those who survived seem stunned by what they saw. Among them, 47 Brits.
I'm in a lot of pain, and it was quite scary, but yeah, I don't think I'll be flying again for a while.
Was there a lot of kind of shock and loud noises on board?
Yeah, like one huge loud noise, things were coming through the ceiling, water everywhere, people crying. Yeah, it wasn't a fun end to the journey there.
After 11 hours flying from London to Singapore, the flight had to make an emergency landing in Bangkok.
Many people describe a huge jolt with no warning, sparking instant chaos. They say a lot of people hit their heads, unable to get their seatbelts back on in time.
Singapore Airlines is regarded highly in the industry, and this is a relatively rare incident, but it is one that may well strike terror in many. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Bangkok, Thailand.
Terrifying situation. Well, with me now is aviation industry expert Sally Gethin. Thank you so much, Sally, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, it is a sort of something out of a horror film. This is everyone's nightmare, the idea that turbulence happens, but to this extent.
Yes, it certainly is one of the worst case scenarios, and in fact it's so incredibly rare for there to be an actual fatality. But having said that, there are serious injuries incurred in air turbulence events, and in fact in the United States 163 serious injuries were logged between 2009 and 2022, and the majority were to cabin crew. But passengers themselves are also impacted. A big life or death decision is whether you're going to keep your seatbelt on throughout the flight in a worst case scenario like this.
So what is the advice? I mean, you often hear, you know, there's going to be a bit of turbulence, put your seatbelts on. And sometimes people do, sometimes people don't.
Actually, the advice is to keep yourself belted in through the duration of the flight, even if it's a very long-haul flight like this one. That should be the rule of thumb, rather than, you know, detaching the seatbelt. So I think a lot of people, you know, as soon as you gain cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign comes off, they tend to, you know, detach that seatbelt. But the best thing is to keep yourself belted in. I mean, this appears to be an incident of clear air turbulence. There's no warning for that. So I think a lot of people think, oh, well, the pilot will tell us when we can expect turbulence. And indeed, the pilots can. But sometimes this clear air turbulence can impact very suddenly. It's linked to the jet stream, sometimes with storms, and sometimes with the terrain.
But pilots do, sometimes say ahead of takeoff, there will be some turbulence on this aircraft. Is it that they don't fully know the severity of it when you say it happens suddenly? Is it just because it's unexpected?
That's when I said sudden, that's just this particular type of turbulence, clear air. There's other types of turbulence, and the other types are the ones that are known more in advance. So, for example, through bad weather, and the aircraft itself has sensors to detect whether there are raindrops ahead, and pilots share data and information together, and of course they're in touch with air traffic control, so they have a lot of inputs to keep passengers safe. But, you know, this unusual phenomenon, clear air turbulence, well, unusual in the sense of being this catastrophic, is something sometimes beyond pilot's control. But there's some new technology coming in for aircraft that will be equipped onto the plane and will give pilots more information to be able to detect this.
What we're seeing, is this unusual, or we just don't hear about it as much, you know, in the news, in the media? Or is turbulence something that you're finding in the data that you're looking at increasing?
So it does seem to be increasing, and some of it is linked to climate change, because the jet streams which carry aircraft around the globe to the advantage of, you know, scheduling, they can actually help. Well, there is climate change to those jet streams. And so that means that these incidents are increasing. I mean, passengers themselves are increasing. We have more flights. Flights are more than they were pre-pandemic now. So coupled with the fact that more people are flying, there are more flights, and there are changes to the jet stream due to climate change, then we should buckle up and be potentially prepared.
Yeah, indeed. Sally, thank you so much for all of that advice. A really terrifying situation for all of those passengers on that Singapore Airlines flight. Let's turn now to the growing row between Israel and the International Criminal Court after the court's chief prosecutor applied for arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister.
Mr. Khan creates a twisted and false moral equivalence between the leaders of Israel and the henchmen of Hamas. This is like creating a moral equivalence after September 11th between President Bush and Osama bin Laden, or during World War II between FDR and Hitler. What a travesty of justice, what a disgrace.
We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas.
No country is above the law, and international organizations are there to do a job. They must be allowed to do their job, and their decisions must be respected.
It is deeply unhelpful. There is absolutely no moral equivalence between a democratically elected state and government exercising its lawful right to self-defense and the actions of a terrorist group.
Rishi Sunak ending that montage there. Well, reaction from global leaders. So is it right for Israel and its allies to be outraged by what they're describing as a false symmetry between a democratically elected government and the actions of a terrorist group? And does that argument even apply under international law? That's the central argument that we want to unpick tonight. Is there one rule for, say, an African leader or Vladimir Putin, and another for an ally of the West? The ICC's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, has applied for arrest warrants for 5 people. Hamas leaders Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Daif and Ismail Haniyeh are accused of crimes against humanity on October the 7th, including extermination, hostage-taking, rape and torture, and war crimes including cruel treatment and outrages on personal dignity. Arrest warrants are also sought for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. They're accused of war crimes in Gaza, including using starvation as a method of warfare and targeting civilians, as well as crimes against humanity, including extermination and persecution. Last week, the head of the World Food Programme told me there was a famine in northern Gaza, but that was strongly denied this evening by a member of the Israeli War Cabinet. Benjamin Netanyahu's close ally, Ron Dermer, insists his government does not have a policy of targeting civilians. We'll look at the merits of the ICC's case in a moment, but first, have listened to my conversation with him.
Well, it's just all false. We believe, as the American president said yesterday, that these allegations against Israel, this attempt to arrest our leaders, it was both an outrageous act and, frankly, a dangerous act. It's outrageous because of the false symmetry that he created between Israel's leaders and the leaders of a genocidal terrorist organization, Hamas. But beyond that, just the charges are false. There's no policy of starvation. There hasn't been a policy of trying to starve the population of Gaza or to target civilians in Gaza. I'm a member of the War Cabinet. We've never had such a policy. And instead of engaging with Israel and understanding the facts, he decided just to defame Israel. And I suppose this is an attempt to just deny us our basic right of self-defense, and it's not going to work.
Mr. Dermer, you're right. The US president did say it was outrageous, but I also want to read to you what else he said since December 2023. He said they're starting to lose international support by indiscriminate bombing that's taking place. He's talking about what Israel is doing. Secretary Blinken said the daily toll on civilians in Gaza, particularly on children, is far too high. The US president sharpened his criticism in February 2024, and he said the Gaza response is over the top. There are a lot of innocent people who are in trouble and dying.
Yeah, well, we are in war, and in war, tragedies happen. And we've had during this war, as you know, Yalda, we've actually had a situation where we had 3 hostages who came out, and our forces fired on them and killed them. We've had friendly fire incidents where we've lost dozens of Israeli soldiers. That happens in war. What is the facts is that Israel has taken action that no other army fighting in urban territory has ever taken to get the civilians out of harm's way. That's not what I say. It's not what Israel says. It's what the expert on urban warfare at West Point said. It's what General David Petraeus said. He said no country has gone to greater lengths to get the civilians in an urban area out of harm's way. Those are the facts. Unfortunately, the prosecutor wasn't interested in the facts. He was interested in these libelous charges against Israel. I said to you again, I'm a member of the War Cabinet. He's basically saying that
and you're going to say that because you are a member of the War Cabinet, Mr. Dermer, but you've just talked about the equivalence with Hamas. And international lawyers are saying that international law does not compare individuals with each other. It compares each individual's conduct with their legal obligations. So the standard is not, is one side better than the other side? The standard is international law. And the prosecutor, with a panel of experts that he appointed, says it's it's not one side complying with its legal obligations. And according to the prosecutor, that isn't happening.
Well, it's just false. And he should have actually looked into the case. He was due to come to Israel in, I think, about a week. He decided not to come, not to understand how Israel's system of justice works. He does not actually have jurisdiction over Israel at all, but he decided to just defame Israel based on false charges. I'm not getting into the whole issue of the false equivalent. That's right. I think it's outrageous. I think it's outrageous to put FDR on one side and Hitler on the other and say both have committed war crimes. That's not the main point. The main point is what you said, the charges themselves. And the charges themselves are false. There has never been a policy of trying to starve the population in Gaza.
So are you saying there's no famine in Gaza right now?
No, there is not. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Well,
there is no famine in Gaza. There has never been, and let me finish the sentence, please. There has never been famine in Gaza. That is a false story. It is a libel. Just like we are now in the International Court of Justice being accused of genocide. There is no genocide going on.
Mr. Dermer,
and the president himself said that yesterday.
Mr. Dermer, you say it's a false narrative. Is Cindy McCain?
I didn't say it's a fault. It's not what I said. If you want to quote me back from what I said 10 seconds ago, just do it accurately. I didn't say it's a false narrative. I said it's false. It is false. There is no famine.
So
in
there's
Gaza.
no. You're saying it's false. There's no famine in Gaza. Tell me why then.
Let me give you some facts.
Allow me to just.
You don't want to actually.
No,
be defended.
I do want to hear it, but I want to tell you
charges.
what Cindy McCain, the executive
you can try to
director,
talk over me, but I'm going to continue to do it until you let me repeat a sentence, because you read a litany of false charges against Israel, and I'm going to respond to those false charges.
Of course, and I want you to, Mr. Dermer.
You're interrupting me again.
To me,
You're not allowing me to finish the sentence, and I'm going to finish 2 sentences. If you'll just be a little patient, you can ask me anything you want. We have had 500,000 tons of humanitarian assistance, including 400,000 tons of food. We've had 20,000 trucks of food going into Gaza. That is not the actions of a government that is trying to starve that population.
Mr. Dermer, I'm going to ask you, you said to me a moment ago that there is no famine in Gaza. Cindy McCain,
Correct.
the executive director of the World Food Programme, joined me on this program just a few days ago and told me there is full-blown famine in northern Gaza. She said that people are dying, children are dying. She said children in Gaza are dying as skeletons. And she told me Israel is not allowing the WFP full access.
Totally false what she said. It's full-blown nonsense. You should have challenged her. You should have looked at the facts. People are not dying. They're not skeletons there. The difference between northern Gaza and southern Gaza is about 3 kilometers. I'm a father of 5 children. If there would be famine in one part of the Gaza Strip, would you not, as a mother or father, I don't know if you have a family, would you not get up and walk 2 kilometers? The whole thing is false. Unfortunately, and I have great respect for her late husband, Senator John McCain, who was a bona fide American hero. But what she said is false, and she's getting false information from people inside Gaza, probably affiliated with Hamas, who are giving her those false numbers, just like the UN got false information from Hamas. They said there were 35,000 people who were killed. They said 75% of them are women and children. All of a sudden, 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you covered it on your show, 10,000 people cannot be identified. Now the numbers have gone way down. There are false reports from the Hamas Ministry of Health that is lying to the world. They have a baseless charge and a libel against Israel about famine, genocide, apartheid, all of this nonsense. It's all false. Unfortunately, the ICC prosecutor has believed this rather than coming to Israel, doing due process, finding out the facts for himself. He's a rogue prosecutor who himself now is above the law, running around, getting into jurisdictions that he has no business getting into. I think you're going to see a very strong response from the United States,
Dermer,
from the United States Congress, and I think it's going to come this week.
So every major humanitarian aid agency in the world that is saying they cannot get their supplies and trucks and humanitarian aid into Gaza is lying, including David Miliband, who made very similar remarks to me as Cindy McCain on my program, just a few weeks ago.
We just had 350 trucks go into Gaza yesterday at a time when Egypt is holding all the trucks on their side. So what are they talking about? We've had over 20,000 trucks. The problem in Gaza is not the trucks getting into Gaza. It's food getting distributed within Gaza because Hamas, a terror organization, is stealing it. Right now, we are flooding Gaza with humanitarian assistance, and the markets have shown that prices have dropped about 90% on basic food items in Gaza. Flour, all sorts of basic food items, 90%. Usually markets don't lie when it comes to supply and demand. If you want to, right after this interview, I will ask my staff to send you pictures in the last 48 hours of markets, bustling markets, fruits and vegetables in Gaza. There is no famine in Gaza. It is simply...
So, Mr. Dermer, though, the court of opinion, the images that are coming out of Gaza, what the world is seeing is something completely different. And then we have the WFP, we have various other aid agencies saying they're not getting in, they're not allowed in, that children are dying of starvation. Ultimately, though, through this ICC arrest warrant, what we're seeing is the first leader of a democratic country to be potentially indicted by the court. I mean, that in itself is something quite shameful that's now happened. Do you think
it's right. It's shameful because it speaks.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has and the conduct that the way that this war has been waged in the last 6-7 months.
I disagree, Yalda. The Jews have been singled out for about 2,000 years. The fact that the whole world will turn around the Jews and treat them differently than any other state is not a new story. It's a very old story. You have a rising tide of anti-Semitism across the world. You had people in Sydney who were chanting "Gas the Jews" 3 days after October 7th. You have people calling from the river to the sea to destroy the state of Israel. You have a Human Rights Council that passes more resolutions against the democratic state of Israel than the entire world combined. When you have countries like North Korea, Iran, Syria, you have the Houthis in Yemen committing gross violations of human rights. There's a targeting of Israel. This is not a new story. It is an old story. It is returned to a very, very ancient hatred. It is unfortunate that this is what the prosecutor has done, because he's now going to fuel the fires of anti-Semitism that you have, because people will say, wait a second, this is the International Court of Criminal Court. This is the ICC. There has to be something real in these charges. And it's not true.
Well, you know, there isn't a history of this court being questioned when it issues these sorts of arrest warrants. And you know, the prosecutor himself said in an interview just yesterday that he's been told by officials that, listen, these courts were created for Africans and thugs like Putin, not allies like Israel.
This court should be created, and it was in the wake of the Holocaust, to be like a permanent Nuremberg to deal with the worst crimes against humanity. Unfortunately, like many other international institutions, like the UN General Assembly, which in 1975 passed a resolution that Zionism is racism and turned itself into a joke, or like the UN Human Rights Council, which nobody takes seriously anymore, the ICC is now in danger of losing any kind of credibility. To go and bring war crimes charges against the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister of Israel, a democratic state fighting against terrorism, it's not only outrageous, it's dangerous, because it's going to start with Israel. It's not going to end with Israel. It's going to come to Britain. It's going to be your soldiers. It's going to be your leaders who are going to be in the dock, and they'll try to do it in America. And I pay attention to how America responds to it, because they are not subject to the jurisdiction of the ICC. And I think you're going to see a very strong response, a bipartisan response to this outrageous decision by the ICC prosecutor. And I hope very much that the judges will wake up and will throw these charges out, will understand, hey, look at what Israel is doing, find out the facts.
And if they don't?
Arrest warrant.
And if they don't?
Then they're going to turn themselves into a kangaroo court. And they're going to have no credibility, because everyone is going to know the facts. Just like all of a sudden the UN numbers will be adjusted for the facts in Gaza. 6 months from now or a year from now, people will say, you know what, wait a second, there was no famine in Gaza. I think there are around 32 people who have died in malnutrition. There have been 20,000 people who have died in the United States 2 years ago for malnutrition. You're talking about children that are all bones, skin and bones, and they're all dying.
Well, that's what the WFP is saying today. They're saying they're not getting trucks in. They're saying children are dying.
A senator in the United States put up 2 pictures behind him about children apparently starving in Gaza, and both of those children had pre-existing genetic conditions that were responsible and had nothing to do with famine. This is an outrageous attack on Israel. It is a libelous attack against Israel. We are fighting a terror organization that is genocidal, that murdered 1,200 Israelis, took 250 hostage, that raped our women, burned our babies. And instead of standing with a democratic country that is fighting against terror, you're standing with terrorists, this ICC prosecutor who's embedding themselves in civilian areas.
And just briefly, I mean,
it's an outrage.
The panel of experts have said the charges have nothing to do with the reason for the conflict. The charges concern waging war in a matter that violates the long-established rules of international law.
It's just not true. And the leading expert at West Point, John Spencer, said no country has ever taken such great lengths to get civilians out of harm's way. While we're talking now, there are 950,000 civilians that have left Rafah. Why? Because we dropped millions of leaflets, just like we did in other parts of Gaza, to get them out of harm's way. That's how Israel prosecutes the war. We will continue to do it and uphold the highest international standards. That is Israel's commitment as a democratic and just state. We are fighting a just war with just means. We have nothing to apologize about. The ones who should be apologizing is the ICC prosecutor. I'm very glad to see that the Prime Minister of Britain said he was deeply troubled by this decision. I hope other fair-minded people around the world will reject it. I think serious countries will not take these charges seriously.
That was Israel's Minister for Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, speaking to me there. Well, coming up, we'll go live to Washington to get reaction to that interview. What did Ron Dermer mean when he said we'd see strong action from Washington soon? I'll be speaking to our US correspondent, Mark Stone. And incredible pictures from Iran, where thousands of people have lined the streets of Qom for President Raisi's funeral procession.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
I'm Mark Stone, I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, DC. And beyond the United States, from across the world, I report on the biggest stories.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I remember some of the worst of the violence here.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
Welcome back to the programme. Well, we've been hearing from Ron Dermer, a member of Israel's war cabinet, who said the International Criminal Court's allegations of war crimes against Israeli leaders are false and dangerous. Well, let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, for more analysis. And Mark, we heard there from Ron Dermer. I mean, really no surprises that he rejected these accusations and described the ICC as taking a very dangerous step. He told me that if they go ahead with this, that it would turn into some kind of kangaroo court.
Yeah, no policy of starvation is what he said. You know, Yalda, listening to him there, the first thing that occurred to me is that if all this is nonsense, if it's all lies, if it's all libel, let us in. Let us see what is actually going on in Gaza. Because remember, Since October the 7th, no foreign journalists have been allowed into Gaza, and indeed some were already there. Al Jazeera have been it's made even harder for them to operate. Luckily, we do have our own local teams who are there, exhausted though they are managing to get pictures out, and we have seen pictures which corroborate what the ICC is alleging. He says no policy of starvation. Well, against that, you could quote, and these are quotes that the ICC has used as part of their claim for an arrest warrant. The defence minister, who says, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel." Netanyahu himself, a few weeks later, says, "We will not allow humanitarian assistance in the form of food and medicine from our territory to the Gaza Strip." The president of Israel said it is an entire nation that is responsible for October the 7th. Biden has called it an indiscriminate bombing. The State Department just last week said that Israeli action and inaction by Israel contributed significantly to a lack of sustained and predictable delivery of needed assistance at scale. These are all quotes which form part of the case that the ICC, that Karim Khan is putting against the government of Israel, Netanyahu specifically.
Yeah, and Mark, one of the things he also said was that they're expecting the United States to now take action. He said, just wait and see, and that's likely to happen. And we are starting to see some of that news emerge.
Yeah, we are, and I think part of it is in this letter, which was revealed a few weeks ago, a letter by some senior Republican senators. Which at the bottom of it, and I'll say it to you, I'll read it to you, it says, "Target Israel," this is a letter incident to Karim Khan, the ICC prosecutor, "Target Israel and we will target you. If you move forward with measures indicated in the report, we will move to end all American support for the ICC, sanction your employees and associates, bar you and your families from the United States. You have been warned." That, I think, they will follow through on that. There is also a suggestion that Netanyahu will be invited here, perhaps to just the House, but maybe to both houses of Congress, to address them. That would be, honestly, a neat two fingers from the United States to the ICC. Yalda, one other thing I thought was really interesting, I think it's important to pick up on. I thought Ron Dermer was just disingenuous, where he said, "I've got kids. If you're lack of food, why don't you just get up, walk 3 kilometres further south to the markets that are full and get food?" I'm paraphrasing. Essentially, that is what he said. The reason, of course, is because it is simply too dangerous to do that. It is more than 3 kilometres from Jabalia in the north of Gaza, right down to the south, where, yes, the markets are fuller, but you can't just get up and walk. That is disingenuous. Yes, of course, the markets in the south of Gaza have got food in them. That's the south. Gaza is 30 or so, maybe more, I think, miles long, and it is a war zone. It is not as simple as getting up and walking to the south.
Thank you so much, Mark, for all of your analysis there and for joining us to break all that down. And we're going to keep the conversation going. Next is the International Criminal Court right to seek arrest warrants for Israeli leaders. We'll be discussing that with 2 lawyers on either side of the debate here in the studio. Welcome back to the programme. So the International Criminal Court could soon issue warrants for senior Hamas leaders and the Israeli Prime Minister and his Defence Minister. It's not the first time they've done it. Well, a warrant was issued for Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir in 2009 for war crimes in Darfur. He's still at large. The former Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta was indicted in 2011 on 5 counts of crimes against humanity in Kenya. But the charges were withdrawn 5 years later. Former Liberian President Charles Taylor was found guilty of aiding and abetting war crimes in Sierra Leone by the ICC in 2012. And in March 2023, ICC judges issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin for alleged war crimes committed during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Well, with me in the studio are Yasmin Ahmed, an international lawyer and UK Director of Human Rights Watch, and Natasha Holsdorf, a barrister and legal director at UK Lawyers for Israel. Thank you both for joining us here in the studio. Yasmin, I'll come to you first. You saw the interview there with Ron Dermer. He described the ICC as, if these arrest warrants go through, as turning into some kind of kangaroo court, and said that the policy of starvation is simply not true.
Well, Human Rights Watch has documented that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. And what we would say is, for an independent international court, as we have seen in this situation, the prosecutor has determined that there are reasonable grounds to suspect that both Hamas and Israeli officials have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity. It will be then for a pre-trial chamber to determine whether, in fact, there are reasonable grounds. The idea that this is some kind of equivalency, it just does not take account of the fact that an international court such as the ICC has evidence before it. It assesses that evidence and it determines whether, in fact, the evidence meets the criteria, the legal criteria.
Natasha, just your reaction to everything that's happened, these arrest warrants, what Ron Dermer said, and now what Yasmin's saying.
It's really unfortunate. I mean, Robert Bernstein, the founder of Human Rights Watch, was clear already in 2009 that this is an organisation that has an anti-Israel bias and an obsessional focus on the Jewish state. The reality is that this is a first. It's the first time the International Criminal Court has sought to apply arrest warrants in a case where it simply has no jurisdiction. Israel is not a party to the International Criminal Court. The state of Palestine, so-called, does not qualify as a state under the recognised criteria in international law. So rather than an independent court here applying the rule of law, we're unfortunately seeing the exact opposite. We are seeing abuses of international law. Lawfare, which is in pursuit of a political agenda, as I say, where there is no jurisdiction, but perhaps even worse than that, where there is no factual basis. Now, you heard a very full rebuttal of the factual circumstances on the ground. The reason that we are seeing the prosecutor advance this libel of starvation is that it is the only way, it seems to me, to shoehorn the situation on the ground in Gaza into the parameters that the ICC deal with, and it is doing so in flagrant disregard of the facts. And may I just come to respond on one aspect of this? Your previous commentator indicated that, if journalists were on the ground in Gaza, the situation would be clearer. There are clear parameters set out by the World Food Programme. They have indicated the daily requirement for the population of Gaza is something like 4,000 tonnes of food aid. We know the figures of food aid that have been going in. COGAT, which is the unit of the IDF.
Well, I did speak to Cindy McCain, and I put that to Ron Dermer, and Cindy McCain's telling me they're not getting anything in. And there is full-blown starvation in northern Gaza. I do want to just bring in Yasmin, because, what Natasha is saying is that there are abuses of international law here. Yasmin, you say that your organisation has documented this and you have seen a policy of starvation. Can you help us understand that? Because we are hearing these phrases being thrown around. What sort of things have been gathered?
So we've documented starvation as a weapon of war. What we have said and how we have found that is that both the fact that Israel has not, and I'm not sure what facts Natasha is looking at, because the UN, independent bodies, and in fact the UK government itself has said that there is famine in Gaza. So I'm really not sure what it's about. But what we as Human Rights Watch have said very, very clearly is that it is not only the facts on the ground that people are in fact starving, that there are children, the UN have documented that there are Palestinian children that have died of malnourishment, but there are also, alongside those acts, we have seen the statements of Israeli officials which have made very clear that these are not just acts, but this is a policy of the Israeli state.
And that is what Ron Dermer was arguing against, saying we don't have an actual policy of starvation, we are in a state of war.
The policy is clear. I mean, you see statement after statement from Israeli officials talking about the fact that until Hamas is defeated, they will not allow food into Gaza. That is collective punishment of the entire Palestinian people for the acts of Hamas. That is using starvation as a weapon of war. And I might just add as well, on the point of jurisdiction, I didn't hear you or other people raising these concerns, even the UK government raising these concerns, when there was an arrest warrant for Putin.
We'll get to
Russia
that.
is not a signatory to the ICC either.
We'll get to that in a moment, but Natasha, your reaction?
No, the issue of jurisdiction comes down to this invention of a Palestinian state and the
well,
legal
do you not agree with the pre-trial chamber?
I'll just allow and the legal acrobatics on display from the previous prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, at the pre-trial chamber are exactly what I'm talking about in terms of international law being thrown out of the window. That is important because it has repercussions for all law-abiding states and for anyone who actually cares about the rule of law and international legal order. But when we come to look at the facts on the ground, all I'm asking is that we apply numbers that we know about. So the World Food Programme, as I was about to come on to explain, has set out already in October of last year what the nutritional requirements of the population of the Gaza Strip are.
That same World Food Programme is now telling me, though, that there is full-blown starvation,
based
Natasha.
on Hamas propaganda, which unfortunately the international media seem to have very little difficulty in repeating.
Cindy McCain is basing it on her staff on the ground.
Well, let's
that is
be
what
clear.
She's not quoting Hamas.
May I finish on the numbers? Because we know, and in fact, Ron Dermer's numbers seem to be a little bit out of date. The most recent update from COGAT is that in excess of 500,000 tonnes, 500,730 tonnes thereabouts, we're looking at nearly 30,000 trucks of humanitarian assistance over the last 7 months.
So how is starvation happening?
Let's
not
may I finish the point? There are two aspects here.
It'd be useful to know why you're saying, why is there starvation there?
Let me answer
Or are
that
you
question.
saying that there's no starvation?
Well, you've just heard Ron Dermer, who has more information than I think all of us put together.
And more than the
saying
UN
that
and aid agencies on the ground.
May I finish my sentence? Saying that there is no starvation in Gaza. But what we do know is that a couple of weeks ago, the last time I checked, there were 650 trucks which were inspected by Israel that were piling up on the border of Gaza post-inspection.
Rafah, the Rafah crossing where Israel has closed. Is that what you're talking? Whereabouts are they piling up? Sorry, but whereabouts are they piling up?
After inspection at Nitzana and Kerem Shalom. If you stop
Kerem Shalom they have not even been at that. You know why they're banged up at Kerem Shalom? Is because humanitarian organisations cannot get to Kerem Shalom because it's so dangerous.
Well, because we have,
and because you know what, humanitarian organisations have been targeted by Israel.
No,
we documented 8 incidences. Human Rights Watch just came out last week. 8 incidences where humanitarian convoys were in fact targeted by Israel. Despite the fact that they had supposedly been deconflicted.
Yasmin, I'll just get Natasha.
What we do know from the Fatah authorities, and these are the so-called moderates that run the Palestinian autonomy in the West Bank, is that Hamas are targeting humanitarian aid workers in order to generate a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We also know that aid organisations on the ground are struggling with distribution because Hamas is stealing aid.
Not because they're being targeted by Israel.
No. Israel doesn't target humanitarian aid workers.
No, so what happened with those incidents? What happened with the World Central Kitchen, with the medical aid for Palestine?
The people who have been on the ground, the real experts here have been clear that the measures that Israel takes to prevent civilian casualties, including providing humanitarian corridors, I mean, the gentleman earlier was suggesting that people cannot move. Well, that's nonsense because 900,000 people have just
I've got about 30 seconds to go.
It's not borne out by the reality of the facts on the ground.
I don't know what reality that you're speaking about because it's not a reality that the UN or anyone else...
OK, and we'll leave it there. But thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Now, we've got some breaking news to bring you. Tributes have been paid to a 73-year-old British man who died after severe turbulence on a Singapore Airlines flight from Heathrow Airport. The passenger has been named as Jeff Kitchen. He suffered a suspected heart attack on the flight. His theatre group have posted this tribute. It is with a heavy heart that we learn of the devastating news of the passing of our esteemed colleague and friend Jeff Kitchen in the recent Singapore Air incident. Jeff was always a gentleman with the utmost honesty and integrity and always did what was right for the group. Our thoughts and prayers go out to his wife and the family at this difficult time, and we ask that you respect their privacy. Well, this is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, thousands turn out to pay their respects to the Iranian president on the first of 5 days of mourning.
Every year we do a census of about 1,000 people. We actually ask them about their habits, and actually we included that, what is your habit in terms of tea drinking, when do you drink tea? And actually we find that the 30 to 45-year-olds are the ones that are really turning to tea more away from alcohol. That's sometimes or often, and that can be at a home situation. Sort of 73% of people say tea is best in the house. So, and also it's people with busy lives. You really want something that's going to be a pick-me-up. There's lots of teas out there. We've bought a range of teas here.
What have you got?
We've got some black teas, mainly black teas. About sort of 70% of the tea drunk in this country is actually a blended black tea. About 70% of that actually is from East Africa. So tea, when it first came to this country in about the 1600s, actually was green. And it was actually drunk as a tonic, as a health beverage, which most people don't realise. There's actually no tannins in tea. It's very lazy methodology in naming.
Okay.
So we actually term these as polyphenols. Actually, there's a group of these called flavanthriols. Don't worry about the long, complicated name. Literally last year in the US, the Academy of Dietetics and Nutrition came out with a daily guideline for actually 400 to 600 milligrams.
So you're putting milk in it?
Yeah, just a tiny dash for me.
So basically, if you consume 400 to 600 milligrams of flavanthriols a day, that's good for cardiometabolic health. So in that case, that's reduced cardiovascular disease, reduced risk of stroke, reduced risk of diabetes. It's hydrating. So actually, 27% of people are actually turning to tea before or after a workout. And actually, hydration is really important because a 2% loss in hydration status actually impacts your physical and your cognitive performance. So fuzzy thinking. So we need to stay hydrated, but really tea has all the hydration properties of water. Tea is as hydrating as 6 cups of water, but it's got all the other myriad of health benefits. Tea actually has the right amount of caffeine. It does have caffeine, but it's got the right amount of caffeine. You've got water, you've got L-theanine, you've got some fluoride there, which is good for our pearly whites. So basically, it is not dehydrating, and actually, you can drink tea throughout the day, and it will not impact your sleep. Earl Grey, really nice. It's quite soft, actually. If you actually look at the tea you're drinking, there's 2 main types of tea. One originally from China. It's got quite small leaves. One originally from Assam, so Central India. Actually, they have quite higher phenolics. So Earl Grey is quite a nice, subtle one with a hint of bergamot.
Welcome back to the programme. Let's turn to Iran now, and thousands of people have turned out to mourn the Iranian president following his death in a helicopter crash on Sunday. Iran has declared 5 days of mourning for Ibrahim Raisi. His body will lie in a state at the Grand Mosalla Mosque in Tehran before being flown back to his hometown of Mashhad, where he'll be buried on Thursday. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi reports.
This is a difficult occasion for Iran at a volatile moment for the country. As the funeral procession made its way into the capital, Tehran, the regime and its supporters were still trying to process the shock of the president's death. The cortege started in Tabriz, the closest city to the site of the helicopter crash. There, mourners reached out, touching the coffins of President Raisi, the foreign minister, and the other victims as they moved through the crowds. Iran's supreme leader has announced 5 days of mourning. Many held pictures of the deceased president and looked distressed whilst prayers were streamed through loudspeakers.
Our hearts are broken to pieces because of this tragedy.
It's a shame that we lost him so soon.
I'm here because I couldn't take it. I'm here for our supreme leader, for our departed loved ones.
But away from these displays of grief, others were celebrating. Fireworks exploded over some Iranian cities, rejoicing the death of a man who was known as the Butcher of Tehran. President Raisi oversaw the execution of political prisoners and was instrumental in the brutal crackdown of protests. On his watch, many were killed or disappeared for standing up to a corrupt regime.
When we first got the news, we still weren't sure whether or not it actually happened. But we were all really excited, really happy, hoping that he has indeed died. But at the same time, we all knew that in the grand scheme of Iran's politics and the state of affairs, this won't really make any difference. This was just the loss of one of their many useless pieces.
The Iranian leadership, with its tributes, is trying to project an image of control, strength and continuity. A new caretaker president's been announced and elections are set to be held at the end of June. The orchestrated succession is a way of signalling stability. Although the deaths are unlikely to threaten the regime, to lose two significant leaders at once is a major blow at a time when Iran faces the possibility of further domestic unrest and questions over its direction abroad. Alex Rossi, Sky News.
Now, before we go tonight, a reminder of our top story. A British man has died after a plane hit extreme turbulence. Dozens of people were hurt after the plane suddenly plummeted thousands of feet. Well, 73-year-old Jeff Kitchen died after a suspected heart attack. He was a grandfather and amateur theatre performer and has been remembered as a gentleman with the utmost honesty and integrity. Let's end tonight with some of those dramatic images from that Singapore Airlines plane.
Breaking news coming to us from Singapore Airlines. A person has died on one of their flights following severe turbulence.
This must have been a terrifying and dramatic ordeal for all of those on board.
The plane just dropped and it was extremely surreal experience.
Dramatic and grim pictures coming out from that Singapore Airlines flight. And of course, we now know the name of the man who died, the British man, 73-year-old Jeff Kitchen. And we heard from his theatre, who issued a statement saying he was a man of honesty and integrity. He died from a suspected heart attack in that aircraft when it faced extreme turbulence. An extremely busy programme this evening, as we've said, covering those shocking images coming from that Singapore Airlines flight, as well as the arrest warrant that's been issued from the ICC prosecutor for Israel's Prime Minister and the Defence Minister of Israel. You heard the debates and the opinions here on the programme. We will continue to have those important conversations. Thank you so much for watching tonight, and good night.